The Jurassic period is often considered a time of dinosaur domination, when these great reptiles ruled the land, and so understandably, they usually get most of the attention in media focusing on this period of Earth's history. But the dinosaurs never conquered the oceans. Instead, other fearsome, fascinating animals ruled the Jurassic waves, animals that are just as interesting and deserving of attention as the dinosaurs. Well, recently the BoneHeads crew and I were invited to come and give a talk at a science festival near Oxford here in the UK about these amazing marine creatures that swam the oceans all those millions of years ago. We focused on the Ichthyosaurs, Pliosaurs and Thalattosuchians, marine crocs, that lived towards the end of the Jurassic period, specifically the species that come from a sequence of rocks called the Kimmeridge Clay Formation. The reason for this being that Abingdon, the town where we were giving this talk, is actually built upon the Kimmeridge Clay, and all sorts of sea reptile fossils have been found from the clay pits dotted around this town. One of these fossils is actually an Ichthyosaur specimen that I've been working on myself for the last few months for my final year paleontology dissertation, and so I couldn't resist the opportunity to talk to people about this passion project of mine, especially since we were giving the talk in the museum where this specimen is housed. Anyway, we presented this talk in front of a live audience and also recorded the whole thing. So here it is, the prehistoric marine reptiles of the Kimmeridge Clay Formation.
Well, hello everyone, welcome to our talk on prehistoric marine reptiles. We're all paleontology students at the University of Portsmouth, currently in our third and final year of our undergraduate degree, and we're all, next slide. We're all doing our dissertations on various things that we're interested in. I'm studying the ichthyosaur actually at the top in the attic gallery, the Abingdon ichthyosaur.
I'm studying crocodiles, so I'm studying a crocodile from the Isle of Wight, a little tiny thing. We think it might be a juvenile of a slightly bigger crocodile, but we don't have any fossils of that today. And then Eddie?
And I'm currently working on a shark from a bit later on from these guys. I've got huge samples of these things. They're pretty cool. So, I think we are talking about ichthyosaurs, as you can see here. The fish lizards, plesiosaurs are the long-necked forms.
And the pliosaurs as well.
Yeah. Short-necked forms.
Yeah, short-necked, but related to the plesiosaurs. And then Hamza will be talking about the Thalattosuchians.
Yeah, so just to let everyone know, Thalattosuchians, I will mention this later on, Thalattosuchians are the marine crocodiles of the Jurassic oceans.
So the thing we're mainly focusing on is something called the Kimmeridge Clay Formation. Here you can see some of the exposures down in the Dorset type section. It's quite extensive across the UK, so this is where it outcrops the surface, and then there's a lot of subcrop underneath other rocks. There's the Dorset type section down there, so Kimmeridge, the town of Kimmeridge that it's named after, going up through Abingdon, up into Yorkshire, and then actually on the Isle of Skye as well. And it's very important oil source rock for in the North Sea. So this is another geological map that I've made for my dissertation showing the Abingdon area. So this is all, the orange is all Kimmeridge Clay Formation. So Abingdon is like built on Kimmeridge Clay. And you can see here the pit where the Abingdon ichthyosaur was actually found back in the 80s, and then some other working pits where they're still excavating, gravel, but it exposes the Kimmeridge Clay Formation. So yeah, we're standing on the Kimmeridge Clay right now, which is pretty cool.
And so this is actually what Earth looked like back during the Kimmeridgian, which is the time period during the Jurassic, which was about 150 million years ago, and sea levels were a lot higher than they are today. So if you can see here, we've got the UK here, and half of it is just covered up by water, so which sort of allowed all these marine reptiles to exist at this time and be found here.
So I'll be talking about the ichthyosaurs that you find in the Kimmeridge Clay Formation. So there's currently 5 that are valid. A lot of others were named in the past, but they were based on very scrappy remains. So we've got Brachypterygius, Grindelius, Nanopterygius, Ophthalmosaurus, and Thalassodraco. These two I'll go into more detail later. Basically, I think the Abingdon ichthyosaur is probably a species of Grindelius, which is named after Grendel from the Beowulf poem, the monster that he fights. Nanopterygius is quite interesting. It's got quite small paddles in relation to its body size. Ophthalmosaurus, quite common throughout the late Jurassic. It's all kind of referred to the species Icenicus, even though that might not be the case. There could be other species out there. And then Thalassodraco etchesi was actually named in 2020, so it's the most recently named one, and it was named by our supervisors, so Professor Dave Martill and Megan Jacobs, who are helping me with my project. And that's actually from the Etches collection down in Cambridge, which is probably also home to a lot of undiscovered or unnamed species. There's a lot of new material in there that needs to be worked on. So Brachypterygius or Grandelius, there's a bit of a debate over this. This here is the holotype specimen, so the first thing that was found and named Brachypterygius back in 1904. So it's just a single right forelimb. There's possibly a left forefin that might belong to the same thing. This was found in Weymouth. And it's quite a broad paddle, you can see. A lot of digits, so hyperphalange, call it, where they extend their digits. Then you move on to 1976, when Grandelius mordax is named, which I think is probably the coolest name of an ichthyosaur ever. And this is what was found. So it's a skull that was found in Norfolk. This is on display in Cambridge in the Sedgwick Museum. And it's just this massive, quite robust skull, quite blunt, rounded jaw tips. Obviously, this was like a top predator of its time. And it was named by McGowan in 1976. But then, 1997, a second specimen is described, or it's found from Cambridge Bay itself. And this one actually preserves a forefin. And then McGowan actually went back on himself and described this in 1997 and said that actually, based on the morphology of the forefin, this is the same thing as Brachypterygius. So he said Grandelius doesn't exist, Brachypterygius is what it's called. And yes, there's some close-ups of the skull. So there's the Grandelius holotype and there's the Brachypterygius holotype. This is the forefin that was found in that second specimen, and this is the other fin that's probably the same thing as Brachypterygius. I don't know about you, but they look quite different. The reason he actually said that they're probably the same thing is because of this feature here. So this contact where the element labeled I, which is the intermedium, contacts the humerus. He said that's, well, at the time we thought that was a very rare thing to occur, so they only found that happening in Brachypterygius and Grandelius. Turns out it's quite a widespread feature among different ichthyosaurs. You can't kind of say it's the same thing based on this one feature when everything else kind of looks quite different. So Grandelius was actually resurrected in 2015, and then quite a few other species were named. So there's 3 other species from Russia, and then the others, Grandelius mordax is the one that occurs in the Cambridge Clay Formation. So here's the Abingdon ichthyosaur itself. That's it on display in the attic gallery. And then these are some plan views that were made from this photo montage taken by Jeff Wallace, who originally found it. And then this is a figure I've put together for my dissertation, kind of labeling all the elements, color coding the different parts. And I've realized it probably died and fell on its back because you've got the left skull elements up here and the right one's down here, so it's like flipped. You've got the left forefin, right forefin there. And yeah, I think this is probably Grandelius based on some preliminary coding of characteristics that I've done. That seems to be what it's coming out as, but we've had some disagreements with our professors. But that's stuff to figure out later on when I've completed my dissertation. So what we're actually looking at here is the left lower jaw, the left upper jaw, the jugals. So these are kind of the bones underneath the eye socket. You can see that kind of curve that would have been underneath it. Left nasal, the right nasal part attached to the right upper jaw, right lower jaw there. And then this piece we figured out actually attaches on here. So in the display now, you can see that's been moved over. Coracoids, scapulae, so part of the pectoral girdle. And then obviously the vertebral column, ribs, a lot of ribs. And then some forefins. These actually need to be switched over. I've realized that's the left and that's the right, so put them all over. But there's a lot of small bones that need moving around, so we'll do that at some point. And there's actually a lot more of this specimen in storage. We've recently been able to bring the storage boxes to the museum, so hopefully we'll be able to sort through all of those and piece together more of this amazing specimen.
Have a bit more of a complete skull once it's done.
Hopefully. So this is what it probably looked like in life. This is Grandelius mordax attacking a Metriorhynchid. To Hamza's May. And yeah, so obviously this is quite a big, robust predator. Sort of, I don't know, I feel like it's a kind of an orca niche filling animal. I don't know what else would have been attacking this, except maybe other Grandeliuses. But yeah, pretty terrifying predator. If you've seen the size of the skull upstairs, the skull alone is over a meter in length, so quite a formidable predator. So this is the really interesting thing about the specimen, these bite marks all over the jaws, and this one especially, so on the right upper jaw, there's two very close together, and this one has a massive excavation, and all of this bony growth around it. That shows that it survived this attack, so it actually was bitten, and then the bone started healing, and there's all of these kind of what look almost like blood vessel traces, where we think possibly the bone maybe got infected or something, kind of grew up into soft tissue and maybe imprinted on the blood vessels. We're not sure about that. Yeah, more bites there. Other bites on the other jaw, the left upper jaw there. So yeah, something very, very bad happened to this ichthyosaur. There's also broken ribs. So you can see where these have kind of like changed direction and there's a bit of growth around them, and that's quite indicative of broken and rehealed ribs. And yeah, we found quite a few of those. Interesting. So what happened to the Abingdon ichthyosaur? I've been doing some research into surveys on ichthyosaur pathologies in the literature, and they find that they're actually quite common in Jurassic ichthyosaurs, especially in the skull and in the ribs. It's mostly like simple trauma, so like blunt force trauma or bites and healing after that. And they're quite common in older individuals. Expect as you get older, kind of like amass more injuries. So that's like when they've done surveys, they find that the larger individuals of a taxon are going to be the ones that have more injuries. So I think the key question here is, was this a failed predation attempt, or is it maybe evidence of like social interaction between other members of its species? So is this like in what's been inferred for other marine reptiles, so in mosasaurs and some plesiosaurs, and also some extinct whales, they found bite marks on the skulls and stuff, and they think that that might be indicative of like targeting sort of non-lethal areas like jaws when they're fighting with other members of their species, possibly for territory or for mates. But obviously that's all very speculative, just based on what we've got. But the fact that it's targeting the jaws, not, well, as far as we can tell, not like the main body, except for those broken ribs. Possibly that's what's happening. And Grindelius is quite a large ichthyosaur, and what else is really predating on that, except for maybe other Grindeliuses. But yeah, it's a really interesting specimen, and we'll be able to see it after this if you want. If you go up to the attic gallery, we'll be going up there and kind of talking about it and pointing out these injuries. So yeah, but what else was lurking in the Kimmeridge clay seas? Eddie's going to tell you about that.
Yeah, I think more interesting animals are lurking there, such as the Pliosaurs, which their name translates to moor lizards, because when Richard Owen, the first curator of the Natural History Museum, first described these, he thought they were more like crocodiles than the long-necked ones, the plesiosaurs, really long-necked. And if any of you have seen Walking with Dinosaurs, you might recognize this from the third episode. It was said to be 25 meters long, which is a bit big. But it's still pretty famous, a reconstruction that you still see around today. Anyway, so arguably one of their most interesting features is their skulls. And this is a diagram of one from down in Dorset. And this is actually a skull that's 2 meters long, so Ben's is huge. But this is bigger. We'll see some actual photos of a fossil later. But as you can see, they've got these huge, huge jaws. And these here, so these are holes in the back of the skull where there would have been muscles going through, and they are massive. So you would have some huge muscles to really help like close the jaws quickly. These skulls are actually built for closing really quickly in hydrodynamics, but because they got so big, it meant that their bite forces were absolutely huge. Really interesting. Also, their teeth are massive. Like, I know T-Rex teeth are big. These are cool. So, past their skull, it gets actually really weird and interesting because, so in some of them you have quite long necks. In Pliosaurs they are shorter, they are thinner as well. You only get like 22 of these in the neck normally for them. But then you get to the girdles, the pectoral and pelvic, and you can see a huge one here from the Etchers collection. And so normally they sort of wrap around the body, but these are really, really wide and flat, and that would have allowed for huge muscle attachments to really give a powerful downstroke for the flippers. And then on the underside of their bellies, they've got these really tight ribs that all mesh together, possibly for like protection from like predators coming up below. But there's still some speculation on that, which is really interesting. And then they have these decently sized tails, which actually had like these little sort of fins on them to help with stability. And little side story. So here is a picture of a Stuart pliosaur reconstruction. And in a lot of actual scientific papers, you'll see this diagram used a lot. It was created back in the 60s, and it was based off of half a specimen, like the back half of a specimen from Stuart in Bedfordshire, but then it was like amalgamized with another specimen from Streatham, and it sort of got called Liopleurodon, and it's been used for everything. Like even papers going back to 2013, you can still see this reconstruction. But it's one of the first to actually have sort of muscles put over the skeleton, so it was really interesting. Anyway, so what were these animals eating? So as you can see, very huge tooth. So this scale bar, so each square is a centimeter, and they've got these huge roots because these were attacking large animals normally, and their teeth are actually triangular in shape with 3 cutting edges. So normally a lot of predators have normally 2, but this has got 3, and they're really robust teeth. And this is actually a skull of a plesiosaur from Australia, and it's actually got bite marks. If you can sort of see here, sort of things labeled T, from a pliosaur called Kronosaurus, which is very large. And actually, from the bite marks, you can tell that the animal bit it the side of the skull rather than on top and bottom. So either the plesiosaur was maybe evading, like going to the side, or this Kronosaurus was coming up from bottom, which is a theory our professor likes to put forwards. In terms of, we've actually got a lot of stomach contents from these animals as well. We've found turtles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, other pliosaurs, and actually an armored dinosaur, which is similar to Ankylosaurus, has been found inside of them. So they really did eat absolutely anything they could get their huge jaws on. And in terms of size, they got huge. So generally current estimates today are about 10 to 12 meters, possibly pushing to 15. There's actually, so if you go up to the ichthyosaur at the top, there's a drawer, and inside that drawer, there's a huge neck vertebrae, which our professor is currently working on, but he's got some huge size estimates for this thing, and if you have a look at it, it really blows away.
He put it
scale.
as 10 to 15 meters so far.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So that first picture I showed you of Liopleurodon, the Walker Dinosaurs one, this is how big our professor said it was in the 90s. This is how big it is now. So it's still 7 meters, still big, but not as big as he originally said. That was based on a specimen from Mexico. That's a story for another day. But generally, this is sort of the size they got to normally, 10 to 12 meters, which is still pretty much bigger than a lot of things in our oceans today. And here's actually a species called Monchirosaurus boyacensis, which was actually described really recently, in the last couple of years. And it's from South America. Really nice reconstruction. So it's been cut off a bit here, but you can kind of try and see the fins at the end of the tail. And this was a very robust animal. Like, you can see this guy to scale. It probably could have swallowed you whole. Locomotion. So these animals, nothing is like them today in terms of how they moved. So they've got these really broad flippers, and in pliosaurs, the back ones are bigger than the front ones. And as I said before earlier, with the girdles, got really good downstroke. Problem is, that means they have a really bad upstroke, so they'd have a lot of lag going up. So what they do, when they push down with their back flippers, they're raising up their front ones. By the time they've done that, they push down the front ones, and this creates vortices, which actually lift up the back ones, and they start again, creating a really efficient movement, which is actually pretty fast. Some of these were possibly pursuit predators, some maybe ambush. And this is actually a diagram from a paper from the last couple of years, really nice. It goes over marine vertebrates throughout history. So you've got ichthyosaurs there, so they come under like tuna-like animals. And then you've got the pliosaurs here. So they're kind of classed as underwater flyers, which is pretty cool. So these animals actually existed from about the end of the Triassic, so about 200 million years ago, and they made it all the way to about the middle Cretaceous. A few theories on why they went extinct. Maybe competition from mosasaurs. Maybe it was the
anoxic event.
the anoxic event. It's a bit hard to say. I think they make it just past the anoxic event, but really it's only a couple species that do. So you start here with Thalattosuchians hawksnow, which is actually from the UK, and a lot of these are. We've got a lot of great pliosaurs from here, and it actually looks a lot like a plesiosaur. That one there, it's still got fairly long neck. And as you can see, it's a really nice chart. So they start off pretty small, and by the late Jurassic, so what Kimmeridge clay ages, they're huge. They're really robust. They are the apex predators of their time. They're a little bit bigger, and then unfortunately, they go extinct. And so here's that map from we looked at earlier, and we've got dotted on a few locations where you can actually find pliosaurs around the world of Kimmeridge age. So there's the UK, and you've got Europe and South America where you get a lot. So you sort of see like where these channels were and where they would have spread around. So let's talk about the actual specific ones of the Kimmeridge, and actually it's only Pliosaurus itself that you find in the Kimmeridge clay. And I've crossed off here the ones that I'm not so sure about, or they're not. They are a bit younger. So we're not sure about those. And that's a bit younger than the Kimmeridge. Here's a pliosaur jaw from the Etches collection. Really cool. To be honest, I recommend going to the Etches collection if you can. It's a really nice place. So the first one we're going to talk about is Pliosaurus brachyderus. That was the first one described in 1841 by Richard Owen. So the first curator of the Naturalist Museum. He's the guy who got it built. He's absolutely fantastic paleontologist. And originally it was put as plesiosaurs, one of the long neck ones. But he noticed, well, hang on, this has got a really short neck, like the vertebrae are really squashed, and it's got huge jaws. And he also noted how plesiosaurs have really long, like narrow teeth for catching fish, whereas this has got quite stout, short teeth for catching large, like prey. And it was actually first found in Lincolnshire by William Buckland, another famous paleontologist, may known from Megalosaurus, another famous dinosaur from the UK. In fact, its species name is named after him, Megalosaurus bucklandi. I've actually found 7 of these in Lincolnshire, and they're all in the Oxford University Museum, so too far away from me, it's doable. And some of the things they differentiate it on, because there's a few species of Pliosaurus, is it's got lots of teeth in the lower jaw. It's got 72 in there, but only a few in the very front of the jaw. We differentiate the front and the back. And then those neck vertebrae, so on the underside, so this is actually cut off a bit. This is a plate from the 1960s of that holotype, and if you can't really see here, but there's a ridge here. It's called a ventral keel. It's on the underside, and none of the other pliosaur species have this. They're all smooth on the bottom. And a little side note about this holotype that they named. So that's the original specimen. So the femur of the leg bone, that's got a rounded edge, and then the epipodials, which are the like radius, the ulna, sort of the bones that come afterwards, they got flat surface attaching to it, and that actually indicates that it's a juvenile or a subadult. Really cool. And we're going to get into a bit of a trend here, because the next few ones are only known from one specimen. Nice ones, but only one. And so this is Pliosaurus carpenteri, and this has got a huge skull of about 1.8 meters and 17 vertebrae. And it was first found by Simon Carpenter in Westbury Pit, which we're going to see again in this slide, 1994. And as you can see, it takes a lot to prepare these animals. It wasn't actually described till 2012 as its own species. So it takes a long time to get these animals out of the ground and describe them. But it was first thought to be Pliosaurus westburiensis, which is what we're going to talk about on the next slide, because it's found in a really similar location. And I mean, they are fairly similar animals, but they thought maybe, oh, it's like one's a male, one's a female, or they just look a bit different. But because, so a fossa, right, that's like a depression. It's like it goes down, and that's on the sort of back of the jaw. This is different from all the other species. So they decided to give it its own species. Also, it's got a pretty low tooth count. So Brachyderus had 72 in the lower jaw. This has only got 54, which is pretty different. And then those epipodials I was talking about, like the radius, the ulnar, and all that, which will become quite circular, they've got these convex edges, so they stick out. And you can actually visit Doris the Pliosaurus in Bristol City Museum. So they did a whole exhibit for her. I mean, and I think she's at the back of the museum now, but they've got this cool like reconstruction of her, and see the actual fossil up there. Definitely worth a visit. And then we get into Westbury-ensis, which is actually also in Bristol City Museum, and it's also from Westbury Pit, and it's also only known from a holotype. It's an almost complete skull, pretty nice one, and only a few of the neck vertebrae and bits of other fragments. And you got some nice teeth. And yeah, it's found around a similar time, and it was also described around a similar time, so they're quite uncanny like that. One of the reasons why another reason they thought it was the same as Carpenteri is because, so in terms of like when we're sort of dating beds and like very thin layers of rock, sometimes we use other animals that are common in there, and this was only one subdivision than the biozone of Carpenteri, so it's slightly younger, but so they could have maybe been the same species, but they are separate now. And then at the front of the jaw, so one of the differences with this, front of the jaw teeth are widely spaced, and then the part of the back of the jaw, it's got like a weird like bony process, very different. And then how that front of the jaw and another bone in the skull about here, how they contact goes back quite far, just above the orbit, which is different from all the others, and again, a low tooth count. So yeah, definitely worth checking out Bristol City Museum because it's got a couple of pliosaurs there, and this is my favourite one. So this is Pliosaurus kevini, which is what, when I had the skull anatomy slide, that's what the diagram was based off of. This is only known from an almost complete skull. It's really nice, and it's 2 meters long. This thing is huge. So there's me for scale, and you can see it is massive. It was first found in Osmington Bay, all the way down in Dorset, and it was described in a really comprehensive paper by multiple big authors in 2013, and they also re-described a lot of the other species at the same time, where I've got a lot of this information from. They differentiated this based on how that sort of part of the jaw, it sort of extends all the way to the front of the jaw, and actually contacts part of one of the teeth on the front of the jaw. And then, so the pineal foramen, which is like a little sort of like third eye, if you will, that a lot of reptiles and other animals have on the top of the head, it's actually got a raised rim, which is different from all the other pliosaurs. And then the back of the jaw, this bit here, if you can see, is actually concave. It goes in, depresses, and it's got a high tooth count, but also the teeth are, so I mentioned earlier the teeth have like 3 cutting edges. They've got 3 sides. Well, this is like subtrihedral, we call it. It's like slightly rounded at the same time, which is very different from all the other late Jurassic pliosaurs. And there may actually be another specimen of kevini. We're not sure. It's got some postcranial material, and it's from Streatham, and it's around the same size and similar age, and it's got similar teeth, but it's a bit hard to work it out. We haven't got as much of it. But again, this was a huge animal, probably about 10 to 12 meters. With pliosaurs, you could sort of say, oh, the skull's about 20% of the body, roughly. Would have been huge. And you can see this down in Dorset County Museum. Highly recommend go seeing it. It's fantastic. I think. So over to you, Hamza.
Yes. Personally, I think is the bit more interesting side of the marine reptiles. I will have to say, hindsight, there are the Thalattosuchians, the marine crocs. There's not much information on them because their material isn't the greatest. There's not enough people researching them, so the information I'm going to give is what the best I can find. But yes, so this is a quick introduction to Thalattosuchus, described this year from Dorset, and this is a very interesting croc because this is a really early Jurassic crocodile, not from the Kimmeridgian, but what's so important about Thalattosuchus is that Thalattosuchus is such an early Jurassic Thalattosuchian that they actually think they pushed back into the Triassic. We originally thought that the Thalattosuchians were from the Jurassic, but now because we have this one, which is a fully developed Thalattosuchian, they're pushing back into the Triassic. So about 201 million years ago, compared to the 153 million year old Kimmeridgian ones. So what makes a marine croc? So the marine crocs from today, they're quite different. They have these elongated skulls. They have these teeth adapted to catching fish. They have these skulls designed to snap at prey. So they have a very weird basal occipital where they can actually turn their neck really well. So there's two groups I'm going to introduce you to. They're the Pliosaurs and they are the Metriorhynchids. The Metriorhynchids are incredibly weird. They lost their armor plates. So you'll see on the table here, some of these are osteoderms, and the osteoderms are these armor plates that the Thalattosuchians had. But for some reason, a lot of them actually lost them, so they can shed the weight. They actually more streamline. Some of them actually elongate their finger digits, or they reduce them into little circular bones to make paddle shapes, and they look slightly more like ichthyosaurs than what we see today in modern crocodiles. So evolutionary history, like I mentioned. So this is the Jurassic formed Thalattosuchians. So the Teleosauridae, so Metriorhynchidae, and then here's the Teleosauridae. So this is slightly outdated now because it actually pushes back into the Jurassic. But here's Teleosaurus. Looks quite similar to a modern day croc, like the gharials from Asia. And then you have the Metriorhynchids, which are incredibly different. So you have the Teleosaurs have these they have these elongated phalanges, whereas these guys, they just completely reduce them into just a giant paddle. They give a shark-like tail. So we'll look at them a bit more. But first I want to introduce you to a Jurassic-formed Plesiosaur. Now this is probably the coolest Jurassic crocodile you'll meet. This is Machimasaurus rex. So there's a scale for a human. The Machimasaurus rex was described in 1837 by German paleontologist Christian von Meyer, measuring 7.5 meters, and literally this thing was the biggest Thalattosuchian of its time. So I'll show you this later. We have some cool osteoderms of an alligator from the Isle of Wight. We think they're measuring about 2 to 3 meters. But then, if you think that's a fairly big animal, just wait till you have a look at that. That is Machimasaurus rex's osteoderm, and it clearly shows these things could be massive. And like I said, anything you could bite into. They were the apex predators of the Thalattosuchians at the time. But as I said earlier, the Teleosaurs, the material is really bad. We only have fragments, so not as complete as your Ichthyosaurs, your Pliosaurs. We don't know why. Probably there's collecting bias, or there's just not enough people researching into them. So this is Bathysuchus. Little information is known, but you can tell these animals are incredibly weird. You've got incredibly thin and slender jaws. Now, they're completely different from your alligators and crocodiles, where they have quite thick, robust jaws. They've got these slender teeth, designed for, like I was saying, interlocking and piercing fish scales, piercing through fishes. So, this is Bathysuchus. And then I'll introduce you to the more known Thalattosuchians from the Jurassic. They are the weird and wonderful Metriorhynchids. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Metriorhynchids are more like they're like killer whales of our time. Like I mentioned, their morphology is just incredibly different. This is Metriorhynchids. What makes them interesting? They lost their osteoderms. They have these paddles that look like ichthyosaurs. So honestly, if you put these things side to side, they look almost identical. There's a lot of characters that makes them different. You've got shark-like tails, and I'll mention this later. They actually found that these animals were viviparous, so that means that they could actually give birth to live young, in comparison to the modern-day crocodiles now that can actually give birth. They lay their eggs instead of giving live birth. So this is Metriorhynchus, the more famous marine croc. If you've seen Ice Age 2, it's in the movie, so they did a very bad representation of what it looks like, but this is Metriorhynchus, described by Christian von Meyer. Funny thing is, Machimasaurus rex and Metriorhynchus, when they first published the papers back in the 19th century, they spelt their names wrong. They called it Mechimasaurus, and they call this they spelled some of the letters here wrong, until when they published it, they realized, we've spelt the name wrong. Can we have the name back, and can we fix it? So, very, very similar to, so they lost their osteoderms. Lots of cranial remains have been discovered, and the problem is, because of how weird they are, their placement in the phylogenetics is completely confusing. Some people actually position them off the crocodiles, so they're a different group that just went their own way, and some people put them with the Pliosaurs. Here is Ichthyosaurs, a small crocodile, only about 2 to 3 meters long. So these were the ones. So within the belly area, they actually found limb bones of a small individual. Some people may think that it ate a small individual, but more studies found that actually giving live birth. They are streamlined animals. They've reduced they're streamlined animals. They have thinner snouts. They actually, which is very interesting, while you saw your plesiosaurs and pliosaurs and your ichthyosaurs, they have these massive forelimbs. They actually reduced them to half the size of their hind limbs. So they're actually moving more propulsion with their tail and their back legs than they are with their front legs. Now here is the incredibly weird Metriorhynchus. This is a Metriorhynchidae. This is Dinosaurs. The Dinosaurs is the short-faced Metriorhynchid, one of the largest, measuring about 5 meters. It's the only Metriorhynchid to have serrated teeth. So they actually think that the ecology of this animal was incredibly similar to killer whales. So you can clearly just tell from the reconstructions of what paleoartists have done and some of the fossils, this thing is a monster you don't really want to encounter in the oceans. The specimens from Mexico found they actually have salt glands. So going into saltwater territories, if they can take over the freshwaters, could you imagine invading another group, which is horrifying. This is Plesiosaurs. It's a tooth. The scale bar would be about that big. So that would have been about like a centimeter scale bar. This is an amazing animal. Not a lot is known about this. People estimate about 5.3 to 6.83 meters. You met Liopleurodon earlier. There are fossil remains to actually say this could be as big as Liopleurodon. So you have these amazing giant ichthyosaurs, these amazing giant pliosaurs, and you have these amazingly big Thalattosuchians, which are also competing with these big animals. So the skull is relatively long and has smaller teeth in comparison to some of the other Metriorhynchids' body sizes. We've got Torvanustes, measuring 4.7 meters. It's thought to be a transitional fossil from Dinosaurs because they found that this animal's body is incredibly similar to Dinosaurs, but the face is really long. So they thought that this animal was transitioning off from being one of the hypercarnivores of Dinosaurs into becoming a bit more fish eater, not actually hunting for these bigger animals. So yes, thank you for listening, and any questions?
Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, we're willing to answer, and we'll be around for a while, probably hanging around the galleries, looking at the fossils if anyone wants to talk to us then. So thank you very much.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that talk of ours. This was actually the first time for us giving a live talk in front of a public audience in person, so hopefully we came off alright. It was definitely a learning experience for all of us, and we had a lot of fun talking to people afterwards about these amazing prehistoric animals and the science of paleontology. Let us know what you thought in the comments below, and please do feel free to share your ideas for future topics we should cover.